Welcome back, friend, to the Flower of Freedom. This is chapter 166, and all rights to both the book and presentation are reserved. We invite you to take the seat, whichever seat you choose, but you're always welcome here as long as you brought your good heart and good intentions. Here we go, chapter 166, Identification. A police car skidded to a stop on the road in front, and its lights bathed the whole area in a strobe of blue light. A policeman jumped out of the passenger side, and Marie could hear the other policeman radioing for an ambulance. "Multiple casualties," she heard him say. Soon she heard the scream of the ambulance. She saw them carry someone from behind them into the ambulance on a stretcher, and she watched the first ambulance as it left. She watched an attendant from the second ambulance reach around Philippe to find his pulse in his neck. "Don't touch him, he's injured. I think it's a pneumothorax. He needs immediate medical attention," she heard herself say, and she saw the compassion in the young man's eyes as he backed away. She heard someone say from behind her, "This one's dead. He's wearing the uniform of the chateau." She marveled that she still could not feel anything but Philippe against her body. Her hand was still acting weird, but she knew it was not like her to be sitting there when people were in trouble. She willed herself to blink. She blinked, but that was as far as her willpower got her. In the blur that made no sense to her later, she ended up at the hospital. When the emergency room physician saw her hand and learned that she was almost finished medical school, he turned to the nurse and he said, "Call Dr. Martineau. He's staying in town at the house of Dr. Pinker because he's in from Montreal for a conference this coming week." The sedative the emergency room doctor gave Marie started to engage just as Marie began to feel the excruciating pain in her hand. She wanted to protest, "Let me feel it, let me feel it. It keeps the horror at bay." But the people simply thought that she was irrational, and at that time perhaps she was. Marie did not realize that Bertie had been admitted first. She had no idea that he needed help. He was unconscious, and after the medical staff had spoken to his parents, they got his head x-rayed. After the injuries that Bertie had sustained in Switzerland, he had to give up sports for fear of precisely this, another impact to his already damaged skull. When Hans had used his legs to push Bertie off him, Bertie had sailed through the air and his head hit the corner of the stone arch. When the doctors saw the x-ray, they were deeply concerned about any prognosis. Bertie was in a coma. He was barely responsive. Colette and Oscar rushed to Quebec City in the middle of the night. They left home not long after the phone had awoken them. A nurse in Quebec City asked them to come. She informed them that they had found their phone number in their daughter's handbag. Oscar had answered the phone, and he asked if their son was with her. The nurse stammered, and she said, "Saint Laurent, their brother and sister. Monsieur Saint Laurent, both of your children are hospitalized here." Oscar barked, "Both? Marie and Bertie? What about Philippe? Where's Philippe?" The nurse responded with a gulp. "Monsieur, one more young man was admitted, but he is deceased. That young man's passport says he's a French citizen, though." Oscar groaned with an emotional agony. He replied, "We'll leave immediately. We're in Montreal, and we'll be there as soon as possible. Please, I beg you, do all you can for our children." Oscar hung up the phone, and Colette was already dressing. She had heard everything. Oscar called Jean-Claude's home, and he explained the situation to a groggy Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude said that Fan would be over to watch the children within minutes. Fan came to watch their boys and Alicia, and the moment Fan arrived, the distressed parents were in the car. There was more horror than any parent could absorb. Marie was going into surgery to repair her hand. Bertie was in a coma, and their beloved Philippe, that boy with more love, more light, and more generosity than any one man could possibly have contained, was in the morgue. The morgue. We have to keep our heads. They need us now more than ever, said Oscar with a firm nod, and Colette nodded too. When they arrived at the hospital, Marie was still in surgery. They were shown to Bertie's room, and their own beautiful boy laid stone still. His skin was ashen, and his head was wrapped in bandages. He looked like he could sit up, though, and he'd say, "I'm hungry." Colette cried softly. A doctor came into the room, and after telling them what little he could, he asked to speak to Oscar in the corridor. "I'll stay with Bertie," Colette said. The doctor apologized for what he was about to ask, but he said they had no choice. It was a police matter now. They wanted Oscar to identify Philippe's body. Oscar swallowed hard. Oscar was a man who stepped up when things were in crisis. Philippe's parents had not yet been informed. Oscar knew that he had to do this one last act of love for the man that he had hoped to call son. Oscar nodded. He put his head back into the room that held Colette and Bertie, and he said, "My love, I'll only be a few minutes. They need me to sign some papers." The doctor walked Oscar down the stairs to the basement. At the door of the morgue, there was a police officer who would accompany Oscar in to see the body. As the morgue attendant drew back the sheet, Oscar saw Philippe. Until that moment, his mind had kept making optimistic noises that insulated him. Marie can't speak. Bertie can't speak. They can't find Bianca. Maybe they've made a mistake. It cannot possibly be Philippe. It simply cannot. Until it was Philippe, laying before him, his daughter's greatest treasure and greatest love, his twin son's most beloved friend and brother, Bertie's best friend, in the same completely bonded way that Desmond had been his, the final pillar of the family that Colette and he had labored for a lifetime to build. It was Philippe. How could he be dead? "Yes, that's my daughter's fiancé, Philippe de Patou," Oscar whispered before he staggered toward the door with silent tears running down his face. "It is Philippe. It is Philippe," his brain screamed. The doctor was still standing outside waiting for Oscar. He wondered if he should administer a sedative, but before he could ask, Oscar wanted to know what had happened. How can a fit young man who just got engaged, who had everything to live for, be dead? That's the end of chapter 166. We look forward to seeing you again for chapter 167. It's called The Carnage. Thank you for coming. Please remember to water those seeds of the virtuous cycle you've planted. Bye-bye.